Good afternoon, church. Good afternoon, church. So I have to apologize. I had this wonderful plan that I was going to come here and worship for the whole morning. I had prayed a lot for, Pastor, Bishop, you don't know this, but I had prayed for a girlfriend, and God had granted me a wonderful woman. I wanted to bring her here and introduce her to you and see if you would bless that. So I had come here in the midst of all of this wonderful intention, but then there's a person, I don't know if you all know, we have a new president. And he did something that was astonishing to even me with issuing executive order to stop people coming into our country. Many of these folks, I stood with some military folks, are people that took risks to their lives to serve as interpreters, contractors for America in our efforts in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. Some of them are dual citizens. Some of them have children in our country, and folks were being detained at airports. So I spent last night till early this morning in Dulles Airport as I drove up from Washington, D.C. to get here to Jersey, and now I'm going to be leaving here and going to Newark Airport and continuing to work on what I consider a bit of a constitutional crisis, where the judiciary now is saying what Donald Trump is doing is unconstitutional, or at least looking to put holds. And so you have, last night, as a federal official, Customs and Border Protection wouldn't even engage me. I had to send notes back to get them to try to release these detainees or let lawyers come back, volunteer lawyers. And as I'm sitting there with lawyers and trying to get people access to lawyers, I began to think that we may now see that the race of the people have changed, and even the religion of folks have changed. But this is a history that we all know in the African American community. And we know there was a time that we saw our rights being trampled upon. And if it wasn't for activist lawyers in the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, activist lawyers who were willing to stand up and battle state laws, we wouldn't be here today. And so I just wanted to come to what I consider this incredible church community, one of the bases upon which I stand. You all, in my time of trial, in my time of challenges, helped to elevate me to be your representative in the Senate. And I just wanted to come in a couple minutes and just tell you a couple of my concerns, but then end where the bishop I know will take off from. We're in difficult times right now because as President Obama, under hostile and harsh conditions, was able to advance the bar for us in many ways, he's been facing, and we've been facing, tremendous headwinds pushing us back. And now that President Obama has left office, there's a lot of things that he was working on that are now in jeopardy. And so a couple things I just want to mention for you all to be aware of. We're hearing a lot of names of people being appointed to agencies that are not problematic, but are really threatening to the efforts of President Obama's success. And I just want to go through three of them real quick. One, there is a nominee for the EPA named Pruitt. And the problem with Pruitt is for vulnerable communities, communities of color who face environmental catastrophes like lead in their water, or air quality that has caused high levels of asthma. Pruitt was one of these people that was fighting against the EPA's efforts to provide clean air and clean water. And so to put him in that place of power, it is a real threat to the health of many of our communities. Number two is Betsy DeVos, who is being put up as Secretary of Education. This is problematic because, again, we just had a president who was working to advance public education and to protect especially vulnerable populations, children with disabilities, children who are being victims of bullying, and even just keeping our schools safe. If you heard during her hearing that she was in favor of allowing people to carry weapons, not the school resource officers or the police, but keep people to carry weapons into our schools. Another person is Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General nominee. And this was one that I took an unusual step of being the first senator to testify against another sitting senator. And I want you to know that I may have stepped on some toes of my fellow senators and broken with tradition, but when you sit next to John Lewis for that testimony, a man who, when he was a young man, had no regard for his own personal safety and was willing to violate norms, but press forth for the rights that I enjoy, that we enjoy. I don't care if I cause myself any personal challenges or professional challenges. It's the right thing to do to stand and speak out against someone who, again, when Barack Obama was going after the Justice Department voting rights laws, remember, Barack Obama's Justice Department fought against that North Carolina law that eventually a federal judge says was surgically tailored to disenfranchise African Americans. Jeff Sessions was criticizing the Justice Department for doing that. When we passed the Violence Against Women's Act in Congress, Jeff Sessions fought vociferously against that. When the Justice Department was going into police departments, like Chicago we saw most recently, and exposing the racial disparities in policing and working on solving those problems, Jeff Sessions fought against those things. And so here is someone that's going to be our highest law enforcement officer and has criticized the Justice Department for doing those things, but more than that, when it comes to voting rights, which are being pushed back dramatically in America, his concern about voting isn't the voting suppression that these voting laws are doing. His concern is saying and giving strength to Donald Trump's lie that somehow there's millions of people voting illegally. Now, you're more likely to be struck by lightning in America than to find in-person voter fraud. And so I say all that to say this is the context of what we're fighting for, but the last thing I want to give you one example of, and then I want to pass the baton on a note that I know the bishop will do much better than I will in letting folks know about. But the last thing I want you to make aware of, and again, there's more, and if the bishop ever wants me to have me come and talk when I'm not taking up his time, there's the Supreme Court nominees coming down. I want you to be aware of that. That's going to be a big battle. There are a lot of issues, but the one I want to make you aware of immediately is one that I know goes to the health and safety of a lot of people here, which is the effort of Republicans now, although many of them are beginning to waver, on repealing the Affordable Care Act with nothing to replace it with. And so if you have seniors in your life, please understand that directly affects them because the expansion of Medicare and Medicaid, much of which is funding our nursing homes in New Jersey, that is at risk. If you have children or hospitals, the repeal without replacing affects millions of Americans' health care, hundreds of thousands in this state right now. And so I say all this to let you all know that something that I have learned from my faith, something that I know the bishop has been an inspiration to me, is even when times seem dark and the people in earthly positions of power seek to threaten your well-being, what we know in a church community like this is we are not powerless against that. And we have come a mighty long way. We have seen despots. We have seen oppression. We have made it up the rough side of the mountain. We have overcome hurdles greater than these. We are not powerless. But we must not grow weary in well-doing. We must not grow faint of heart. We must understand that the Bible says very clear, we can do not some things, we can do all things through Christ. But I want to be clear. We cannot be seduced into dark places. I don't want, and I'm tempted to do this sometimes, we should not be vilifying the other side. We should not be casting broad brushes of hate in the face of the hate that we've experienced. I can say this here because we are Christians. And we must match hatred with love. We must match darkness with light. And so that is my appeal to you all now, is to please stay engaged and aware. The opposite of love, people say, is not hatred, it is silence. King said it more eloquently than I can. He said, what we will have to repent for in our day and age is not just the vitriolic words and violent actions of the bad people, but the appalling silence and inaction of the good people. And so what I love about the teachings of our bishop is this is not a story from 2,000 years ago. This is a living, powerful truth today. When Christ stood up for the stranger, we must try to stand up for the stranger ourselves. As it says in Matthew 25, when I was sick, you comforted me. When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was in prison, you visited me. Even as you've done to the least of these, you have done for me. And so my prayer for us as a community is to understand how powerful we are. Alice Walker said the most common way people give up their power is not realizing you have it in the first place. But the Bible tells us of our power. And so let us not be silent amidst what's going on. Our voices matter. Let us not be complicit through inaction to what's going on. Let our voices be heard. Let us not just allow the darkness and curse the darkness. Let us ignite even the smallest light of hope can banish that darkness. I am going to fight every day now, every single day, against the appointments and against repeals and executive orders. But I know when I go to Washington that you all may not be with me in physical presence, but I know here in New Jersey a whole lot of folk are standing with me as well. And so, thank you. Thank you. And so, let me conclude with this. Every one of us has a personal testimony to the power of God in our lives and also the power of God's servants, which are us. I want you to know that my parents taught me to love because I am a product of love. To join in loving with others because it is past conspiracies of love the reason why I'm here. Now, I just want to end with just this one note. When I got to Washington, the first day, I went to see John Lewis before I was sworn in. My mom wanted to take me there. My dad had died just days before, and she wanted me to sit with John Lewis because she believed that before I became the fourth elected African American in the history of our country, I better go to sit with a man that was one of the people that was responsible for the fact that I am where I am. And I want to end with this because it just shows you that you cannot underestimate the power of one person and one voice. What I did not know when I visited John Lewis until a year later, I did research on how I got to New Jersey. My parents were living in D.C. in 1969, and they tried to move to New Jersey, and they found in Bergen County, New Jersey, that just about every one of the towns in that county, and there's 70, they wouldn't let black people move into them in 1969. Real estate agents were steering black people away. And so what happened is a group of lawyers with the Fair Housing Council worked to get my parents. They set up a sting operation where my parents would visit a home, be told it was sold or off the market, and the white couple would come behind them and find out it was still for sale. Now, on the day of the closing, my parents had gone to a house, they liked it, they left, were told it was sold, white couple came, put a bid on the house, and on the day of the closing of that house, my father showed up and a lawyer instead of the white couple. The real estate agent was shocked and angry, and he stood up and punched my dad's lawyer and sigged a dog on my father. Now, listen, I'm in church, so I got to tell the truth, because every time my dad would tell the story, the dog would get bigger. It went from Toto to Cujo in a matter of a decade. But so I'm in my first year of the Senate, and I want to write about that story, so I go back to fact check. I found the head of the Fair Housing Council was easy to do. From the 1960s, easy to find her because she's still the head of the Fair Housing Council in North New Jersey today. African-American woman named Lee Porter turned 90 last year. Now she's not fighting to help black couples move in, she's fighting to help Muslim couples, same-sex couples. She's fighting to get equal housing rights for everybody. I asked her to find the lawyers that represented me. And she said, the lawyers are going to be hard to find. The one guy that took the punch for your family, he's dead. But the other one, the one that organized the lawyers, Arthur Lessman, he's still alive. Here's his number. I called him up. And I said to him, Arthur Lessman, sir, thank you. I'm where I am today because of what you did then. Why did you do it? I wanted to know what his motivation was. And this is what he told me. He goes, I remember the day I made the decision to represent black families, a white man, 1960s. And I said, you remember the day? And I go, I'm thinking they might say February 3rd or something. He goes, yeah, I remember the day. It was a Monday. And I go, how do you remember it was a Monday? And he said, Cory, because the Sunday before that, I was sitting comfortably at home, watching TV, and I saw something that was so outraging me. Now, he didn't get caught in a state of sedentary agitation, where what you're watching on TV gets you upset, but you don't do anything about it. He said, I was so disturbed by what I saw, I went to work the next day and said, hey, we got to go to Alabama. And my partner looked at me, we didn't have much money. He knew we couldn't go to Alabama. So we decided to do the best we could with what we had where we were. Now, what did he see on that Sunday that so disturbed him into action to start calling around and saying, who needs a volunteer lawyer? I may not have much money, but I got something I can do to help people. He found the Fair Housing Council. They gave him a file, Carrie and Carolyn Booker, my parents. What disturbed him? What did he see on that Sunday sitting home in his living room? Well, what he saw was a bunch of folk on a bridge in Alabama called the Edmund Pettus Bridge. What he watched was a bunch of marchers try to get across that bridge and be beaten back with billy clubs by Alabama state troopers. Now, I'm not sure. I got to Washington and sponsored the Congressional Medal of Honor for those marchers. I didn't know their names. I'm not sure if they understood that just by standing up, that they would not be just fighting a battle in Alabama, but their love would leap space and time and eventually immediately change the heart of a lawyer in New Jersey. It would leap space and time and change the destiny of one young man that would go on to the United States Senate. The answers are in the Bible. Jesus does not call us to be successful. He calls us to be faithful in the fight. The answers are in the Bible. Jesus does not call us to simply sit back and wait for things to happen, because faith without works is dead. When it says, I can do all things through Christ, we all like quoting that, but it says to strengthen us. I can do all things through Christ. Doesn't strengthen you to sit back on your couch. You got those muscles to get out and fight for it. Frederick Douglass said it simply, to paraphrase him, I prayed for years for my freedom and I was still a slave. It wasn't until I started praying with my hands and my feet that I found my freedom. So I'm telling you right now, we are not powerless. We can speak up. One small act done in a righteous cause can reverberate and shake the world. Do not despair. Do not despair. Do not grow cynical. We may have dark days here, and we may feel like we're in the dead of night, but I know what the Bible taught me, that weeping may endure through the night, but joy cometh in the morning. Thank you.